In October 1978, power company employees discovered the lifeless body of a female near power lines. The discovery was made between Whitworth Drive and Division Street in Spokane, Washington. Spokane County sheriffs, deputies, and detectives responded to the location to begin the investigation. The scene was documented and processed for evidence with the assistance of forensic personnel. Evidence, including possible DNA samples, was collected during the investigation and autopsy. The victim was identified as 16-year-old Chris and Baxter, who had been reported as a runaway by her mom on September 30, 1978. Evidentiary items were sent to the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory for testing. Although 1978 DNA testing abilities were very limited, investigators believed the samples contained DNA. However, an analysis could not be completed due to these limitations. The evidence was securely stored for future testing. In August 2006, knowing the advancement in DNA testing abilities, Major Crimes Detective D. Marsky sent the samples back to the Washington State Police Crime Lab for testing. The test results showed DNA consistent with Chris and Baxter and an unknown male. The male profile was entered into the combined DNA indexing system, but a match was not found. In 2014, the profile was updated in CODIS and entered into the National DNA Indexing System, where it was compared to every DNA entry in the nation on a rotating basis. But still, a match was not identified. In 2020, Major Crimes Detective Michael Drappett yet again submitted the samples to the Washington State Police Crime Lab for additional examination. In early 2021, portion of the forensic evidence was sent to Othram's laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas for advanced DNA testing. Using forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram scientists developed a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown male contributor. Othram's in-house genealogy team identified potential relatives of the unknown male, including a direct descendant of the individual who was no longer alive. These leads were provided to Spokane County Sheriff Detective Michael Jopo, who used this new information to conduct a follow-up investigation. Living family members of the identified relative were then contacted and interviewed. Reference DNA samples were collected, and subsequent DNA profiles were developed and analyzed by Othram scientists, resulting in additional investigative attempts to identify the unknown male contributor. Continued investigative efforts revealed Keith D. Lindblom as a possible person of interest. He was born in 1949. Detective Drapeau searched law enforcement databases and learned Lindblom was arrested and charged in Spokane County for the 1975 violent assault of a 16-year-old female victim near the area where Chris and Baxter's body was discovered. Lindblom admitted to having intercourse with the juvenile victim and pled guilty to assault in the first degree. Through the continued investigation, it was learned Lindblom was released from prison on August 7, 1978, and was not in custody at the time that Chris and Baxter was assaulted and her life taken. Detective Drapeau also located a child of Lindblom's in Louisiana, and through the comparison of a DNA sample obtained by the Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office, found the suspect's DNA collected in 1978, showed 320 times more likelihood of a match to Lindblom and his known child than if it was compared to an unrelated individual selected at random from the U.S. population. Later, relationship testing performed at Othram's suggested a parent-child relationship between Lindblom's child and the perpetrator, indicating that the male DNA collected in 1978 indeed belonged to Lindblom. Lindblom passed away before the entry of DNA into the CODIS and NDIS databases, which is why a DNA match was not found earlier. Detective Drapeau consulted with the Spokane County Prosecuting Attorney's Office about the case, and with this evidence, they agreed that charges and Lindblom's arrest would have been warranted if he was living. Keith D. Lindblom perished in a fire on April 11, 1981, with the certificate listing the manner as an accident. Although he will not face criminal charges for taking the life of and assaulting Chris and Baxter, investigators with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, along with its assisting partnering agencies, hope this brings much-needed answers to Chris's family, friends, and at a minimum, a small amount of comfort knowing the suspect was identified through DNA testing. The Spokane County Sheriff's Office thanked Othram, the Washington State Police Crime Lab, Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office, Lindblom's family members who cooperated during this investigation, and mostly the family of the victim, Chris and Baxter. their patience and assistance during this long and difficult journey to identify the perpetrator. In February 1996, Terrence Backhead arrived at the Lil Champ food store in Orlando, Florida between 5 and 6 a.m. to prepare for a 6 a.m. opening. During his shift, his life was taken by an unknown assailant. Terrence was stabbed a staggering 73 times. He had only moved to Orlando a few years earlier, worked 60-hour weeks, and did not have many known associates. There were no witnesses to the crime, and so investigators quickly exhausted all leads, trying to find those responsible for Terrence's brutal demise. In 2003, the case was re-examined, and the Orange County Sheriff's Office sought new leads in the case. Some exclusions were made using a DNA profile developed from crime scene evidence, but the perpetrator was not identified. The case had again gone cold. In the fall of 2019, the Orange County Sheriff's Office engaged the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to assist with the case. The department contracted Othram to use advanced DNA testing to develop a comprehensive genealogical profile that could be used to generate new leads that might identify a suspect. Othram used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile. Upon successful generation of the profile, Othram returned the profile to law enforcement, where investigators used forensic genetic genealogy to narrow in on possible suspects. Empowered by these fresh genealogical leads, investigators were able to confirm the suspect in Terrence Backhead's case as 54-year-old Eustis resident Kenneth Roberto Jr., who is now being held without bail on charges of a first-degree slaying and robbery with a weapon. In August 2023, Kenneth Stowe Jr. was found guilty of all the charges against him and is now awaiting to be sentenced. On July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl followed a barking dog in the Race Point Dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. The little girl stumbled upon a decomposing body. The remains were just yards away from a road, and a significant amount of insect activity was visible. 2 sets of footprints led to the body, and tire tracks were found 50 yards from the scene. The victim was lying face down on half of a beach blanket. There was no sign of a struggle. Police theorized that she either knew the perpetrator or had been asleep when she was attacked. At the scene, the sand and beach blanket were not disturbed, suggesting that the body was possibly moved to the specific spot where her body was found. A blue bandana and pair of Wrangler jeans were under her head. She had long auburn or red hair pulled back into a ponytail by a gold-flecked elastic band. Her toenails were painted pink. Police determined the woman was approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed 145 pounds, and had an athletic build. She also had expensive dental work, including crowns, worth between $5,000 and $10,000, and several of her teeth had been removed. Both of the victim's hands and one forearm were missing. She was also nearly decapitated, possibly from strangulation. One side of her head had been crushed, possibly with a military-type entrenching tool. The autopsy that was performed determined that the woman lost her life roughly 2 weeks before she was found. It was difficult to estimate her age. She could have been as young as 20 or as old as 49. Some investigators at the time believed that the missing teeth, hands, and forearm indicated that the perpetrator wanted to hide either the victim's identity or their own. Police pored over thousands of missing persons cases and a list of approved vehicles driven through the area. No matches were found. No other evidence was found besides the jeans, bandana, blanket, and ponytail holder, despite extensive searches of the surrounding dunes. Despite investigators' best efforts, they were unable to identify the victim. She became known as the Lady of the Dunes. The woman was buried in October 1974, after the case unfortunately went cold. The first facial reconstruction of the woman was created with clay in 1979. Her remains were exhumed in 1980 for examination, but no new clues were uncovered. The body was exhumed again in March 2000 for DNA testing. In May 2010, a CT scan of her skull was carried out that generated images that were then used by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for another reconstruction. In 2014, One of the case investigators raised funds for a new casket because the original thin metal casket had rusted and deteriorated. Throughout the years, there were several leads, but nothing that ended up being fruitful. In 1987, a Canadian woman told a friend that she saw her father strangle a woman in Massachusetts around 1972. Police attempted to locate the woman but were unsuccessful. Another woman told police the reconstruction of the victim looked like her sister, who had disappeared in Boston in 1974, but this ended up not being the case. Rory Jean Kessinger, who would have been 25 years old at the time of the crime. Rory Jean had broken out of jail in 1973. Authorities saw resemblance between Rory Jean and the victim. However, DNA from her mother did not match the victim. Two other missing women, Frances Ewalt of Montana and Vicki Lamatin of Massachusetts, were also ruled out. Throughout the years, there were also a lot of different suspects and theories surrounding the case. In 1981, investigators learned a woman who resembled the victim was seen with mobster Whitey Bulger around the time the woman was presumably slain. Bulger was known for removing his victim's teeth. A link to Bulger was never proven, and he lost his life in prison in 2018. Tony Costa, a serial offender in Truro, Massachusetts, was initially a suspect, but later eliminated. Costa passed away on May 12, 1974. The victim was found in July 1974. At one point, a man named Haddon Clark confessed to investigators that he was the one that took the Lady of the Dunes' life. Authorities determined that Clark suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, a condition which may lead someone to confess falsely to crimes. In 2004, Clark sent a letter to a friend stating that he had slain a woman on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He also sent two drawings, one of a handless naked woman sprawled on her stomach, and another of a map pointing to where the body was found. In April 2000, Clark led police to a spot where he claimed he had buried two victims 20 years before. He also stated that he had ended the lives of several others in various states between the 1970s and the 1990s. Investigators could never concretely link him to the Lady of the Dunes case. In August 2015, speculation arose that the Lady of the Dunes may have been an extra in the 1975 film Jaws, which had been shot on Martha's Vineyard, specifically the village of Menamsha, about 100 miles south of Provincetown between May and October 1974. The son of horror author Stephen King brought this to police attention after reading The Skeleton Crew, How Amateur Sleuths Are Solving America's Coldest Cases just weeks before. While watching the film's 4th of July beach scene, Hill spotted a woman in the crowd wearing a blue bandana and jeans, similar to those found with the body. He wondered, what if the young victim no one has ever been able to identify has been seen by hundreds of millions of people in a beloved summer classic and they did not even know they were looking at her? Although a lead investigator has noted interest in this lead, others have described it as far-fetched and wild speculation. In 2022, the skeletal remains were sent to Othram. From these, a DNA profile was generated that was used to identify distant relatives and eventually identify the victim. On October 31, 2022, the FBI field office in Boston announced that the victim had been identified as Ruth Marie Terry. No details of any potential suspects were disclosed, nor any reason why Ruth was in Massachusetts at the time of her slaying. The FBI stated that Ruth's identity was determined using investigative genealogy, the same method used to identify other unidentified victims and over 150 criminals. Ruth Marie Terry was born on September 8, 1936, in a mountainside shack of Whitewell, Tennessee, to Johnny and Eva Terry, the latter of whom passed away at the age of 23 while giving birth to Ruth. In 1957, following a short-lived marriage, Ruth left Whitewell to work at the Fisher Body Automotive Plant in Livonia, Michigan. In 1958, she gave birth to her son Richard, but was unable to care for him due to financial difficulties. She allowed the superintendent of her workplace, Richard Hanchett Sr., to adopt her son in return for him paying off her expenses. After the adoption process was finalized, Ruth left Livonia and moved to California. Ruth reached out to her son in 1972, but he was not ready to meet her due to a drug overdose, which left him in a coma for 18 days. On February 16, 1974, Guy Rockwell Moldovan, an antiques dealer in Reno, Nevada. For months before she lost her life, the couple visited her family in Whitewell. Ruth's grandmother, Brittany Knowinglansky, later recalled that Ruth was not herself whenever she was with Moldovan, who exhibited possessive behavior. The couple then went to Chattanooga to visit Ruth's half-brother, Kenneth, and his wife, Carol. They later recalled Ruth and Moldovan saying they were going to travel the U.S. to look for antiques. Kenneth also noted that they spoke about visiting Massachusetts as they were leaving. In the late summer of 1974, Moldovan returned to Tennessee to tell Ruth's family that she had gone missing from the couple's California home. According to her sister-in-law, Jan Terry, he stayed for a short time and simply told them that he did not know where Ruth was. Ruth's brother James traveled to California and hired a private investigator to find her. The investigator told Ruth's family that all of her belongings had been sold and that she had left the state of her own after becoming involved with a religious cult. In the 2 decades prior to her investigation, Ruth was listed as deceased in family obituaries. Some family members theorized that she was in a witness protection program and could not contact them. On November 2, 2022, the Massachusetts State Police announced that they were seeking information on Ruth's husband, Guy Rockwell Moldovan. He was born on October 27, 1923, and passed away on March 14, 2002. Moldovan was an orphan who was adopted by Abram Albert Zadaransky Moldovan and Sylvia Lily Silverblatt, and had a brother named Michael Simeon Jave Moldovan. In 1942, Moldovan was living in New York City and attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He was disqualified from active service in the military during World War II due to a mastoid infection. On May 11, 1946, while working as a professor, he married Joellen May Loop in Bellevue, Pennsylvania. The couple lived in New York, California, and then Seattle, Washington, where Moldovan worked as a disc jockey. The couple divorced on July 16, 1956. 2 years later, on September 30, 1958, Moldovan married Manzanita Eileen Manzi Ryan in Kootenai, Idaho. Manzanita had a daughter from a previous marriage, Dolores and Mearns, then aged 18. Both women disappeared in Seattle on April Fool's Day of 1960, with Moldovan becoming the prime suspect. Their bodies were found a few days later in a septic tank. Moldovan fled Seattle, but was arrested by the FBI and charged with unlawful flight to avoid giving testimony into their demises. He was never charged with taking their lives, but served 15 months behind bars for the unlawful flight for not giving a testimony charge. Shortly thereafter, on July 29, 1960, Moldovan married Evelyn Marie Emerson in King County, Washington. They married a second time on August 10, 1963, in Los Angeles. Moldovan subsequently faced larceny charges for swindling his third wife's family out of $10,000. Around the time his second wife went missing. In 1961, he was convicted of those charges and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. A judge suspended the sentence in March 1962, provided that Moldovan repay the money. True crime writer and Rule devoted a section of her 2007 book to Moldovan in connection with what happened to his second wife and her daughter, with an extensive discussion of police efforts to connect Moldovan with the crime. Moldovan is also the prime suspect in the slaying of Henry Lawrence Red Baird, a 28-year-old bred truck driver, and the disappearance of Barbara Jo Kelly, a 17-year-old waitress in June 1950. Barbara was last seen in Humboldt County, California on June 17, 1950, when she embarked on a date with Baird, her boyfriend. Baird's body was discovered face down on the beach near Table Bluff the following morning. He had received a gunshot to the back of the head. Except for his shoes and socks, he was naked. Barbara's personal clothing was found carefully folded and tucked underneath the rest of his, with the exception of her shoes and stockings. No trace of Barbara herself could be found. She has not been seen or heard from since, and it is thought that whoever shot Baird had kidnapped her. Moldavian moved to Chewaler, California, a small community near Salinas around 1976. According to a feature article written about him in 1985, he had retired from his job as an executive vice president of a silver store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. In the profile, he was working at the radio station Kazoo in Pacific Grove as a volunteer host of a 3-hour weekly call-in show on aging, growing, and making transitions. He also worked at a tobacco shop in Carmel. According to his obituary, he passed away at his home in Salinas of a lengthy illness. He was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was described as an artist, actor, and poet. He was survived by his wife, Phyllis Moldovan, and his sister, Joan Towers of Salinas. On Monday, August 28, 2023, Cape and Islands District Attorney Robert Galebois said in a statement that based on their investigation, it has been determined that Mr. Moldovan was responsible for what happened to Ms. Terry in 1974. The case is now officially closed, he added. Investigators are now looking at the possibility that Moldovan could be connected to more crimes. It was Sunday morning, November 15, 2015, when a family living on Farley Lane near Lillian in Baldwin County, Alabama, made a shocking discovery on their private road. They found a car with the body of Devon Deshun Kennedy of Pensacola, Florida in the back seat. He had been fatally shot. Investigators with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office worked the case and identified some persons of interest at the time. Lieutenant Andrew Ashton with the Baldwin County Sheriff's Office said, "We just did not have any solid evidence to link them directly and charge them at that time. It also was not enough to say they were not going to be suspects at all." That all changed when 32-year-old Cody Darnell Herring was arrested on April 19, 2023, and charged with taking Deshun's life. He had his first court appearance on April 21, 2023, where he told the judge he has spent the last 7 years incarcerated on a federal firearms charge. Herring was finishing up that prison term when Baldwin County investigators identified him as their prime suspect. Lieutenant Andrew Ashton said, "He was released from prison. At that point, Escambia County had a hold on him for whatever charges they had. So he went from there to Escambia County, so we kind of had to wait from Escambia County to finish what they had, what he was involved with them with, so they could release him to Alabama. It is believed Deshun and Herring knew one another and the motive was robbery. Evidence suggests the shooting happened elsewhere." Lieutenant Ashton was the lead detective on the case in 2015, and being able to bring news of this arrest to the victim's family was a special moment. It has been dragging on for years and years, so I think there was some relief, and I am hoping that as time goes by with this, that more information does come forward. But we have what we have with Decode, and I'm just glad we are able to move forward with it, Ashton said. At his bond hearing, District Judge Bill Scully set bond at $150,000. As conditions of his release, if he were to make bond, Decode Herring would have to wear a GPS ankle monitor and would not be allowed to leave the state. If you have any information regarding this case, you are asked to contact Lieutenant Andy Ashton at 251-972-6872. 73-year-old Gregor and 72-year-old Irma Pesic lived in Canberra, Australia in 1999. On the night of November 6, 1999, two masked men forced their way into the Pesic's Grover Crescent home at around 9:30 p.m. The couple were bound with cable ties and savagely beaten before the man ransacked their home, stealing cash and jewelry. Gregor managed to free himself and call police, but Irma suffocated on her own blood and lost her life at the scene. Detective Sergeant Craig Marriott recalled the event. They were violently assaulted. They were bound with cable ties, duct tape, and a telephone cord, and the house was ransacked. After a period of what is estimated to be about an hour, Mr. Pesic, who had been in and out of consciousness, was able to free himself from his bindings and found his wife face down in the hallway. He rolled her over and removed her bindings, but she had passed away. She had effectively drowned in her own blood from a broken nose. Found that the Pesics were also victims of aggravated burglaries in 1997 and 1998, which are thought to be linked to the third fatal break-in. Police made it known that they believed someone in Melbourne's Hungarian community could hold vital information on who was responsible for what happened to Irma Pesic. Investigators found DNA evidence at the crime scene. But with DNA technology not being as advanced in 1999, there was little they could do. In 2012, a $500,000 reward was offered for anyone able to help the police secure a successful conviction in the case. In 2019, investigators decided to take another look at the case. DNA technology was now a lot more advanced. Almost immediately, a DNA match was established through the National Crime Investigation DNA database. DNA testing led investigators to Steve Fabrizi. It took a while to track Fabrizi down. When he was questioned by investigators on September 8, 2023, Fabrizi made partial admissions to his involvement in the incident. He admitted being in the premises for the purpose of the burglary. He also gave details of the burglary that was not known publicly. 68-year-old Steve Fabrizi from Rowville, Melbourne, was then subsequently arrested and charged with taking the life of Irma Pesic. Fabrizi faced Dandenong Magistrates Court on September 21, 2023, where he applied for an opposing bail. Detective Sergeant Craig Marriott told the court police he had serious concerns that Fabrizi, also known as Istvan Fabrizi, could flee the country if released, as he is a dual citizen of Hungary. Marriott said they also feared the 68-year-old may interfere with witnesses with his alleged co-offender still on the run. The court heard that while Fabrizio owns his own home in Australia, he has no family there. With police aware, he planned to return to Hungary, where he owns land upon his retirement. Fabrizio also has about $250,000 in savings, Marriott said, creating further concern that he had the means to leave Australia. I am also aware he has made statements to Victoria Police while in custody about wanting to harm himself. He made the same statement to us, he said. He asked us to shoot him. The court heard while the 68-year-old has had no prior offenses for failing to answer bail, he did spend time in prison from 2010 to 2012, after being convicted of conspiring to hijack a truckload of cigarettes. Magistrate Jason Ong ultimately refused bail and ordered Fabrizi to appear in Canberra Magistrates Court on an undetermined date. In a statement released on behalf of the Pesic's family, they said they had never given up hope of finding out who was responsible for this heinous act. Our grandparents did not deserve what happened to them. Not only was Irma taken from us, but Gregor's life all but ended on that night. And ours have never been the same, they said. Outside the court, Detective Superintendent Scott Mahler from the ACT Police said this arrest was immensely satisfying for investigators. The family of Irma Pesic never gave up hope, never ceased asking for community assistance, and always worked to keep the case in people's minds, he said. Mahler said police were continuing to work to identify and charge a second suspect and believe it is only a matter of time before this occurs. I am confident it is only a matter of time before we are able to provide full closure for the family and the Canberra community, Mahler said. The $500,000 reward offer remains active, and information received can still be considered for this reward. Furthermore, investigators released an image of a man they believe may have information on what happened to Irma Pesic. On November 19, 1997, police were dispatched to Blissfield Township, Michigan, in response to the discovery of human remains in a cornfield owned and farmed by the caller. Blissfield Township is about 75 miles southwest of Detroit. The cornfield is located west of Quarry Highway and north of Carroll Highway. There was a layer of snow covering most of the body. When police arrived to examine the remains, they observed the body of an unidentified, unclothed male that was missing the head and both hands. The hands appeared to have been cut from just above the wrist. Officers also observed what appeared to be sore striations on the ends of the bones. The body appeared to belong to a light-skinned Hispanic man. The man had no scars or tattoos. He was 5 feet 8 inches, tall, and weighed an estimated 150 pounds. Due to the removal of the head and hands, a positive ID never could be made by the Michigan State Police. A witness provided a possible name, Roberto. The witness said he was married with children and had a house where he raised chickens between McAllen and Westlake, Texas. When Roberto left home, he was supposed to be traveling only to Chicago and then back. Investigators were unable to find a Roberto that went missing that fit the description of the victim. On November 8, 2016, the National Missing and Identified Person System released a sketch of Roberto based on what the witness told investigators, but no one came forward to identify the man. Finally, on January 24, 2023, 51-year-old Ricardo Sepulveda and 49-year-old Michael Sepulveda were arrested by U.S. Marshals in Ohio. They are brothers. Both of them were charged with taking the life of the unknown man. They were also charged with assault to maim, conspiracy to commit assault with intent to maim, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit tampering with evidence. If convicted, Ricardo Sepulveda and Michael Sepulveda are facing a life sentence without the possibility of parole. A motive was not revealed, and authorities did not say how the suspects were connected to the crime. Michigan attorney Dana Nessel was the one that announced the arrests. All crime victims deserve justice, regardless of how long it takes to receive it, said Nessel. I appreciate the hard work of the Michigan State Police, the many local and federal law enforcement agencies, and my criminal trial prosecutors for their persistence in pursuing this case. Unfortunately, officials said the John Doe's identity is still unknown, but is believed to be a 32-year-old from Corpus Christi, Texas. Police said there is potential for additional charges against others who assisted in the actual crime or with covering it up. Anyone with information is asked to call Detective Sergeant Larry Rothman at 313-407-9379. 34-year-old Leonard James Irving lived in Portland, Oregon in 2011. His family and friends referred to him as LJ. He had 3 children, aged 5, 6, and 7. On June 25, 2011, LJ, dressed in a lime green shirt and dark jeans, went out to celebrate his nephew's 21st birthday. He had gotten off work at 9:30 p.m. from his produce job at Winco Foods and had to report to his part-time chef's job at the Lloyd Center's Courtyard Marriott by 7 the next morning. But he told his girlfriend he had to join his nephew at Season in Sports Bar and Lounge on Northeast 82nd Avenue because family was important. Outside the bar after midnight, his nephew Lamar Lovett Hill and another man exchanged angry words, and LJ stepped in to calm the situation. LJ then walked across the street with his nephew to his minivan in the lot of the new Happy Fortune Chinese restaurant. But before they could get in and leave, someone fatally shot LJ 4 times in the back and shot Lamar in the neck, wounding him. Samuel Thompson, who owned the Season in restaurant, said he did not hear the gunfire because he was in the rear lounge where Benson High School alumni were celebrating their 10th reunion. But Thompson knew something was terribly wrong about 12:30 a.m. when people rushed into his business. Thompson ran across the street and found LJ on his back, his right arm on his chest beside his van. The driver's door open. Thompson checked to see whether he was breathing and dialed 911 at 12:37 a.m. I sat down on the ground next to him. I had my hand on his arm, Thompson said. LJ's aunt heard that he had possibly been shot and drove to his mother, Lucy Michaud's house, and they drove to the crime scene together. It was there that Lucy learned LJ was not alive anymore. My son was an innocent bystander, she said. Some coward shot him. LJ's girlfriend, Adrienne Millam, said she thought it was a bad dream at first. She got word while at home where she was caring for LJ's 3 young children and her own 4-year-old daughter. I kind of cried to myself in the pillow, Adrienne said. Why do people do this? Why is it so easy for people to get guns? It is still surreal. I am thinking he could still be at work. Maybe he is not really gone. It's crazy how he can be there one day and not the next. They did not see the guy coming. It really hurts that it was cold-blooded for no reason. LJ grew up in Portland, but spent time during his high school years in Seattle with the family described him as a dedicated father who saw his children on his days off and weekends and dreamed of working full-time as a chef. His specialties, spicy foods, prime rib on Christmas, and jambalaya. In 2005, LJ was sentenced in federal court to 60 months in prison for distributing illegal substances, and had been on federal supervision since June 2009. I thought my heart was broken that time, his sister said, but she was proud that LJ took responsibility for his actions and served his time without blaming others. His family said he matured, got his GED, and since his release had worked hard to make ends meet for his children, holding down 2 jobs. Investigators had few leads to work on, and the case unfortunately went cold not long after the investigation started. Then, in January 2023, 37-year-old Joan Martian Polk was arrested in connection with what happened to LJ Irving. Polk had been living in Multnomah County Jail since May 2022. for another case in which he faces similar charges. He is pled not guilty in that case. Portland Police Bureau Chief Chuck Lovell said he was thrilled with the news of the arrest. I spoke to LJ's mother today, and she passed along her appreciation for the work of the detectives, Lovell said in a statement. I agree. This arrest is the culmination of almost 12 years diligent, meticulous work by investigators, and I am grateful to them for their tireless efforts to achieve justice for LJ. A trial date has not yet been made public. Samuel Johnson, who was one of the first people at the crime scene, formerly worked at Self-Enhancement Incorporated, a non-profit organization that works with at-risk youth. He left SEI to start his own business. But he launched Reclaim the Village, a personal effort to spur the community to get involved to combat such violence after Andre Payton, a 19-year-old on his SEI caseload, was fatally shot in Old Town, a case that remains unsolved. Portland needs to wake up, Thompson said. At the end of the day, it has to be a call to action. The community needs to start preaching love. Once again, too many lives have been taken for nonsense. It needs to be understood. A good man in LJ lost his life. 28-year-old Terry Ladwig lived in Concord, California in 1994. She was married to Navy Petty Officer Stephen Ladwig. On December 2, 1994, Terry was beaten and strangled in the apartment she shared with her husband on Adelaide Street in Concord. Stephen Ladwig found Terry's body after returning from a tour of duty above the USS Stephen Ladwig was never a suspect in her demise. No suspects were named by police at the time. Forensic evidence was taken from the apartment. The only other lead investigators had was that there was no sign of forced entry. This possibly meant that Terry knew her attacker. Investigators were unable to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. On January 27, 2023, 55-year-old James Grimsley was arrested in Salt Lake City, Utah, and charged with taking Terry Ladwig's life. Originally from Oregon, Grimsley was employed as a trucker in Salt Lake City at the time of his arrest. There was no sign of forced entry, and we can presume that the victim let him into the apartment. I can tell you it was a violent scene. Looked like there was a violent struggle between Terry and the suspect. There was forensic evidence obtained from the scene along with many interviews conducted at the time of the initial investigation, Donnelly said. That information may come from the district attorney's office, or us, after the arraignment. Grimsley was booked into jail in Salt Lake County on a $1 million warrant and was subsequently extradited to Contra Costa County. One of Terry's friends, Brittany Shores, had this to say after news of the arrest was made public. She would brighten my day when she came in. 6-year-old Leisha Tohic lived in Windsor, Ontario, Canada in 1971 with her parents and her 8-year-old brother, Michael. On the evening of May 14, 1971, Leisha and Michael were playing outside their Julad Road home. A man approached them just before 9 p.m. He offered Leisha $8 to take a walk with him down the street, which she accepted. The man also offered Michael money to go ride his bike in order to distract him while he walked away hand in hand with Leisha. Michael alerted his mother when the man and Leisha did not return and the police were called. 4 hours later, Leisha's body was found less than a mile from her house in the backyard of a Hickory Avenue home. It was around 1 a.m. that an officer scanning yards with a flashlight found her body. The perpetrator left her body close to a gate leading to the back alley. Police found 2 of Leisha's teeth along with an adult tooth next to her body. She had been severely and violently beaten. The adult tooth and other evidentiary items were collected by investigators, so that it could be used later on. Witnesses came forward saying they saw a strange man hanging out at a restaurant across the street from the Tohic house. He was never located. The case attracted national attention. Hundreds of tips came in from across Canada and the U.S. At one point, there were more than 500 persons of interest in the case. In the 1990s, investigators were able to extract DNA from items found at the crime scene. In 2015, investigators announced that they were able to create a DNA profile of the perpetrator. Investigators sought the services of Parabon Nanolabs, a DNA technology company in Virginia, that specializes in DNA phenotyping, process of predicting physical appearance and ancestry from unidentified DNA evidence. Law enforcement agencies use the company's snapshot DNA phenotyping service for narrowing suspect lists and generating leads in criminal investigations. Parabon came up with two different images. The one showed what the suspect looked like at 25 years old when the crime was committed. The other image showed what the suspect may look like now, at approximately 70 years old. In December 2019, Windsor Police Staff Sergeant Scott Chapman announced that Leisha Tohic's case was finally solved. Chapman said that Leisha's case is among several cold cases that were solved using genetic genealogy. Our case was one of the very first Canadian cases that used the technique to identify an offender, Chapman said. On ancestry research websites such as GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, users have the option to not share their genetic information with law enforcement, Chapman said. Police were ultimately able to identify the perpetrator through the DNA of a distant cousin that was found in a database. Parabon Nanolabs assisted with the identification. Windsor police made the decision at the time not to reveal the unknown man's name. They only said that he recently passed away and settled out west after committing the crime. While police were applauded for finally solving the crime, the refusal to release the man's name was met with some public criticism. Finally, in 2023, Windsor police changed their stance. It was announced that Frank Arthur Hall was the man responsible. He was 22 years old back in 1971. Hall lived less than 2 miles from the Tohic family. He was never a suspect or a person of interest until the DNA match confirmed his guilt. Hall passed away in February 2019 in Edmonton, Canada, just a few months before the DNA match. Windsor Police Staff Sergeant Scott Chapman was the one who announced that Hall was the one responsible. That was unclear whether they could legally name Hall since there was such little precedent. That was part of the reason Hall's name was withheld at that time, said Chapman, acknowledging the landscape has since changed as genetic genealogy has become more mainstream. Prior to the release of that information, Chapman flew to Edmonton to tell Hall's family members. They were shocked but showed strength, he said. We have to keep in mind whatever Frank Hall did in his life is not a reflection on these people, Chapman said. They've been victimized by this information too. According to Chapman, police records are unclear as to whether Hall's home was canvassed as part of the initial investigation back in 1971. Hall was, however, known to police in Windsor and in other places, mostly for property crimes like theft. Though his name was not known to the public, other law enforcement agencies have been made aware of Hall since 2019. Now that Hall's name is out there, Chapman believes it could lead to more tips from the public regarding other cases. It will give potentially new life to different investigations, he said. It is entirely possible. On January 18, 1981, 2 newspaper delivery boys, ages 9 and 14, stumbled upon a female body in Camarillo, California. The body belonged to 20-year-old Rachel Zindis and was found in a carport. The carport was located just across the street from her apartment, which she shared with her brother and 2 young daughters, ages 1 and 2. Rachel was a community college student. An autopsy determined that she had been strangled and assaulted. Investigators learned that she had gone out for the evening and hired a couple of babysitters to sit with her daughters. After returning from an evening out, Rachel drove the babysitters home. Officials stated that they believe Rachel's life was taken after she returned and attempted to exit her vehicle. Detectives from the sheriff's office investigated the case until all leads were exhausted and the case became cold. 11 months after Rachel lost her life, a very similar crime occurred not far away from her home. On the night of December 11, 1981, 21-year-old Leisha Gordek, a retail worker living in Oxnard, California, about 10 miles west of Camarillo, was found dead. Attended a club at the Port Hueneme Naval Base. After going to a disco together, Lisa's friends dropped her off at her home around 1:30 a.m. At 3 a.m., Lisa's neighbor called law enforcement to report a fire coming from her apartment. After members of the Oxnard Fire Department extinguished the smoldering fires, Lisa's body was discovered in the bathtub. Like Rachel, she too had been strangled and assaulted. The cases were investigated separately from one another until 2002, when a new look at the suspect's DNA from Rachel's crime scene was submitted to the FBI's combined DNA index system. The search yielded no results, but in 2004, investigators looking into Lisa's case notified the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, announcing they had linked both cases to a single suspect using DNA testing. But once again, unfortunately, the DNA returned no results for a suspect, and the case went cold. In December 2019, Ventura County's Cold Case Unit stepped in and opened a line of inquiry using genetic genealogy, the now common practice of identifying possible biological relatives using advanced DNA testing. The investigation provided new leads. Further DNA testing confirmed Tony Garcia of Oxnard was the man responsible for taking the lives of both Rachel Zindis and Lisa Gordek on February 7, 2023, in Oxnard, California. Sheriff Jim Freihoff stated that Garcia was born in Roswell, New Mexico, but was enlisted in the U.S. Navy and stationed at Point Mugu near Oxnard. He was discharged in 1980 but remained in the area, where he became a karate student and instructor for many years. This suspect has been hiding in plain sight for over 40 years, said Sheriff Freihoff. Chief Benitez said they identified a number of common denominators between the suspect and the victims, but declined to say what they were. Benitez stated Lisa came to visit Oxnard from Connecticut for a planned 2-week trip to visit a friend in the U.S. Navy, and ultimately decided to move to Oxnard months before her life was ended. However, it remains unclear if Lisa and Garcia knew one another, and if he was the friend she came to visit. Ventura County District Attorney Eric Nazarenko said, "After more than 4 decades, justice is finally coming to the families of Rachel Zindis and Lisa Gordek. As this case demonstrates, charges can be brought at any time and there is no statute of limitations. We thank the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, the District Attorney's Bureau of Investigation, and the Oxnard Police Department for never giving up on finding Rachel and Lisa Slayer. Investigators are looking into the possibility that Garcia might be involved in other crimes and are appealing to the public for help. Anyone with information can contact the Ventura County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Bureau at 1-805-383-8704 or email their cold case unit at coldcase@ventura.org. On June 27, 1983, sheriff's deputies were called to an unincorporated area of Rohnert Park, a medium-sized planned city some 50 miles north of San Francisco, California. A 7-year-old boy stumbled upon a female body behind a real estate office by the corner of Petaluma Hill Road and East Cotati Avenue. When police arrived, they discovered the woman had been fatally beaten with lumber from a stack of wood nearby. Evidentiary items were collected from the crime scene and stored so that it could be used later. Investigators quickly identified the woman as 37-year-old Noel Russo. She was last seen 3 days before her body was found on June 24, 1983. According to Noel's friends, she had been fighting with a boyfriend and went to stay with a friend in Santa Rosa, California. That night, the friend drove her to Courthouse Square, where Noel was going to catch a Golden Gate Transit bus back to her apartment in Rohnert Park. From there, she disappeared. Detectives began piecing together Noel's life. She had grown up in San Mateo County, and in 1962 made local headlines for being named Miss Burlingame. The then 16-year-old told the San Mateo Times that her dream was to become a model, and her favorite sport was dancing the twist. "I could not have been more surprised," the bubbly teen said. "I never in the world thought I would win. I just entered to please mother." A photo that accompanied the article showed Noel beaming, her arms filled with a bouquet of flowers. In the next 2 decades, she married and divorced twice and had a son. She had worked for a time as a forest ranger trainee in Colorado. Thereafter, she returned home to the Bay Area, where she was attending Santa Rosa Junior College when her life was taken. She lived in an apartment on Avram Avenue in Rohnert Park with her 18-year-old son. She had plans to move to Boys Hot Springs. Noel loved riding her bike around town. She was known to hitchhike, and friends worried that she was too trusting of strangers. Detectives believed Noel never boarded a bus back to Rohnert Park. It seemed she had encountered someone before it arrived. In the days after the slaying, investigators used a sketch artist to draw Noel in the clothes she was wearing on June 24, 1983, and circulated it in hopes of finding leads. Deputies and detectives collected a significant amount of evidence during the investigation, and numerous interviews were conducted. Detectives developed certain persons of interest over the years, but no arrests were made and the case went cold. The sheriff's office reopened the case in 2010. For the next 12-plus years, detectives began to use DNA analysis technology, submitting several pieces of evidence to the Santa Clara County Crime Lab and the Serological Research Institute. Finally, in a press release, authorities announced that 65-year-old Alfredo Carretero Jr. was arrested on October 2, 2023. He was charged with taking Noel Russo's life. Deputy Rob Dillon said, "Russo's family has been notified of the arrest and would appreciate privacy." Carretero Jr. was one of the original persons of interest in the case, the sheriff's office said. He was 25 years old when the crime took place. He was positively identified as the man responsible for what happened to Noel, based on DNA and other evidence. Carretero Jr. is detained in the Sonoma County, Maine Adult Detention Facility without bail. Deputy Rob Dillon also said, "Throughout this investigation, detectives worked closely with the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office. The Sonoma County Sheriff's Office and Sonoma County District Attorney's Office are both dedicated to justice for victims, whether the case is new or old. The VCI unit continues to investigate many cold cases and relentlessly pursue justice for the victims of violent crime. Is currently slated to appear in court on October 18, 2023. It is not known yet if Noel knew him. Investigators are looking at the possibility that he could be one of her ex-boyfriends. Authorities have released little information about Carretero other than that he has prior convictions in Sonoma County in 1995 and 2001. For possessing stolen property and possessing illegal substances, respectively. Court records also show that he was involved in a domestic violence civil case in September 1985, about 2 years after Noel lost her life. A woman whose mother was one of Noel's best friends recalled their time together in San Francisco. They kind of liked to bar hop a little bit, and just like anybody in the area, have a little bit of fun. And that is what they were doing the night that she went missing. They split up. She said Noel may have been talking to an ex-boyfriend, but she did not think it was him that she went off with. But somehow they got separated at night, and she could not get a hold of her the whole next day. And then they, of course, found her. The resulting discovery and the sadness it brought stuck with her mother for years. She said, enough so that her mother kept a journal and often wrote about her slain friend. I think her eyes twinkled when she looked at her. She was just a beautiful person. And that is one thing that shined through in my mom's writing, that this was somebody she really cared about, and it just devastated her that she lost her. 20-year-old Christa Martin lived in Wichita, Kansas. She lived alone in an apartment on South Osage Street. It was a place she had just recently moved into in the fall of 1989. On October 1st, Christa was reported missing after family members were unable to contact her. The next day, on October 2nd, police went to Christa's apartment to see if she was there. Inside the apartment, they found Christa's body. She suffered blunt force trauma to the back left side of the head. She had also been assaulted. Investigators could not find the weapon that was used, but did collect DNA evidence from the crime scene. It was noted that there were no signs of forced entry. At the time, DNA testing and CODIS systems were not available. Nonetheless, the DNA evidence was carefully preserved. In their investigation, police noted that there was a domestic disturbance call that went out in the vicinity of Christa's home a week before her life was taken. Officers were unable to confirm if this incident had any connection with Christa's case. The case detectives sent evidence to the FBI crime lab in hopes of identifying a suspect, but unfortunately, this effort yielded no results, leaving the case unsolved. In 2009, DNA evidence was submitted to the Sedgwick County Regional Forensic Science Center, which resulted in a potential suspect profile, but there were no matches in the CODIS database. In 2020, the Wichita Police Department, leveraging advanced technology, again sought the assistance of the FBI to reevaluate the DNA evidence collected in 1989. The police department teamed with Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help to identify the person responsible. The forensic evidence was then sent to Othram's laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas, for advanced DNA testing. Othram's scientists developed a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown perpetrator. After successfully completing the process, the DNA profile was delivered to the FBI's forensic genetic genealogy team, and the FBI team performed the necessary work to generate new investigative leads. In 2021, a team consisting of a Wichita police cold case detective and an FBI special agent embarked on a journey to Alabama and Arkansas, collaborating with additional federal agents working in Maryland. Their mission was to conduct extensive interviews and gather additional evidence to break the case. Finally, in April 2023, a possible suspect, Paul Hart, was identified. Frustratingly, it was discovered that Hart lost his life in a car crash in Memphis, Tennessee, in March of 1999. In June of 2023, the Wichita Police Department detective and FBI special agent traveled to Arkansas, where they collected additional DNA samples from direct relatives of Paul Hart for further analysis. Through additional testing, investigators confirmed that Paul Hart was responsible for taking Christa's life. A press conference was held on October 2, 2023, to announce the update in the 34-year-old cold case. In fact, the announcement came exactly 34 years after Christa's body was discovered to the day. Detective Adam Vandermolen, the lead detective working Christa Martin's case, said the Wichita Police Department never forgot Christa. It is just after the initial investigation, investigators had nothing else to go off of, and that is when they looked at this case through another lens. For investigators to think, in '89 we should probably do a DNA collection kit on her because maybe something will happen. Had they not done that in '89, we would not be looking at this point in time because that technology was not a thing back then, but it is now. I think it is evident that she was remembered on multiple occasions. In '89, '09, and 2020, Vandermolen said, "The Hart family. No ties to Wichita. Not from Wichita at all. Not really from the Midwest. They are from the great state of Arkansas." So I said, how does this tie into Wichita? These people are not from here. What is the story there? So we started digging into that family. And as we dug into that family, we found an individual who lived in Wichita in 1989. And shortly after the slaying of Christa Martin in October 1989, this individual up and left Wichita and went back to Arkansas. No one knew about him. We have asked Christa's family, does this name ring a bell? No. Asked the original investigators, went through the case file of the people they talked to and the neighborhood. This individual's name never came up in any of the investigations from '89 up until the present. He lived around the corner from Christa Martin's house, and it is 6 houses from Christa Martin's house where her life was taken. Vandermolen added that if it had been someone in Christa's circle of friends, he believed that the information would have been known much sooner. But since it was potentially such a stranger to her, investigators did not know who exactly they were looking for. It gives me goosebumps because it was there. We just did not know about it until a couple of months ago. They were about the same age range and by all accounts that I have been able to track down had no ties to one another. Just a chance encounter? I do not know. It is an answer that we will probably never know. What we did learn was that Christa was a very outgoing individual that frequented local drinking establishments and befriended people she encountered. It was not uncommon for Christa to get rides home from people she had recently met and invited them to her apartment. Vandermolen said that he hopes this case shows the department will work on cases until they cannot any longer. Sedgwick County's District Attorney, Mark Bennett, also spoke at the press conference. He said that when Wichita police presented the facts of the case to him, it was determined that charges would be filed if Paul Hart were alive today. As he is not, the case is now considered solved. Law enforcement made me aware they were working on this case, and when they reached as far as they could and came to all the conclusions that they could reach, with the assistance of the Forensic Science Center, they presented it to me as they would any other case. After listening to all the evidence presented and the information gathered and the conclusions that they were able to make using the DNA, it is clear to me that this is a case that I would have charged if the suspect was alive to charge him. This is a completed investigation. This is a cleared investigation. Also at the press conference, Ember Moore, Christa Martin's niece, thanked investigators and volunteers for their dedication in solving the case. "I am glad we can finally move forward and have peace knowing that the perpetrator is not walking around free or amongst us," she said. "Again, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone involved in bringing justice to Christa's case. She deserved so much more out of this life than what she ended up with." 9-year-old Debbie Lynn Randall lived in Cobb County, Georgia in 1972. Her parents were John and Juanita Randall. She also had an older brother named Melvin. Late at night on January 13th, Debbie was walking home from a laundromat across the street. She never made it back home. 4,000 people started looking for her. A local radio group, the Concerned Citizens Committee, and students from the nearby college who had heard the news and wanted to help in any way they could. Her body was found 16 days later near an intersection of Windy Hill and Powers Ferry Road. Her body was found by a college student who had voluntarily joined the search effort. Crucial pieces of evidence, namely a hair and a piece of cloth with a flowery design, were stored by investigators. 2 young locals told authorities that they saw a dark pickup truck backed up in a parking lot near Debbie's house that drove away quickly. All that was left in the parking lot was laundry detergent. Investigators diligently followed up on all of the leads, but came no closer to identifying a suspect. The case eventually went cold. A 2001 test that the FBI conducted on the hair that was found at the crime scene narrowed the pool of possible suspects significantly. The piece of cloth was sent to a lab in 2015, and thanks to DNA testing, resulted in a DNA profile of an unknown man. DNA testing carried out in 2019, made possible by extra funding and a reanalysis of the cloth in 2022, brought investigators even closer to answers. Further DNA testing in 2022 then brought investigators into touch with people who were probably related to the perpetrator. Those relatives supplied DNA samples to assist authorities. More testing was done, and in 2023, brought up William B. Rose, who was 24 years old back in 1972 and lived in the same apartment complex where Debbie's family lived. Rose took his own life 2 years after he ended Debbie's life. Investigators made the announcement in September 2023 that Rose is the man responsible. Cobb County District Attorney Flynn Brody said, "It may take us some time, but with the new technologies that are coming out every day, we are going to do everything we can to solve our cold cases, to make sure we bring people to justice. The answer we are providing today will not bring her back. We cannot extract justice from the perpetrator, but I know he must answer to a higher power." Ron Alter, a cold case investigator with the district attorney's office, said Rose had previous arrests for alcohol-related incidents and possibly took his own life due to fear of being caught by the police at the time. Even though he was not a suspect, if he drove by, I'm sure he saw her. I believe that was a crime of opportunity. He saw her by herself and abducted her, Alter said. The investigator confirmed investigators used ancestry websites to find familial matches to Rose from distant relatives and narrowed their suspect list from there. Debbie's brother Melvin Randall also spoke at the press conference. "I learned over the years that it does you no good to hate or hold grudges. Melvin is the only family member alive who heard the news. Debbie's mom passed away in 2018, while her father passed away in 2022. I would like to say that I wish my mother was here, but I know she knows in heaven now that it is finally over. And we just want to say we thank all of you for what you have done to make this day come to pass," Melvin said. "After a while, I blamed myself for it because I was her big brother and I battled with it for a while. But then I realized that there was nothing I could have done. And it just happened and it was not my fault. I'm just grateful for the community. It is a relief that it was no one that we knew. And it was just great that it is over. It has weighed heavy on us for a long time. Despite the losses he has endured and the painful circumstances around all of them," Melvin Randall said he was not angry with either Rose or his family. "I know they are struggling going through this too. It was tough for us, and I am sure it is just as tough for them. I wish all of them well, and God bless them. And I do not have any animosity toward them." Morris Nix, a retired detective with the Cobb County Sheriff's Office who worked the case, said, "Technology does not get old. It does not retire. It does not get sick. And it does not quit. Technology was seeking William Rose, and it found him in the grave. 38-year-old Demisha Alvarez was found stabbed multiple times in the office of her family's auto repair shop on B Street in West Houston on April 24, 2009. She succumbed to her injuries at the scene. Investigators from the Houston Police Department were able to collect DNA evidence, but had no other leads, and the case went cold. In 2021, the police department's cold case squad re-examined the evidence in the case as part of a case review project. They identified Jorge Trevino Cardenas through DNA evidence and found additional information implicating him in the case. 50-year-old Cardenas was charged with taking Dalmatia's life on January 26, 2023. Authorities said he is currently serving a sentence for an unrelated crime. Investigators did not reveal a possible motive and also did not say if Dalmatia and Cardenas knew each other. Anyone with additional information in this case is urged to contact the Houston Police Department at 713-3083600 or Crime Stoppers at 713-222 TIPS. 35-year-old Crystal Rogers lived in Bardstown, Kentucky with her boyfriend, Brooks Hawk, their 2-year-old son Eli, and her 4 children from her previous marriage in 2015. Known as the bourbon capital of the world, Bardstown is a small town with a population of just below 14,000 people. Crystal was the eldest daughter of Tommy and Sherry Ballard. By all accounts, they were very close. She worked 2 jobs to make sure her 5 children were always well taken care of. Crystal, Eli, and Brooks visited his family's farm on the weekend of the 4th of July. It is a 245-acre farm located about 9 miles south of downtown Bardstown. Crystal dropped 2 of her children off at her ex-husband's house and left 2 children with a babysitter. On the morning of the 4th of July 2015, Brooks woke up and Eli was next to him, but there was no sign of Crystal. She had completely vanished. Her car was not on the driveway. Interestingly, Brooks did not report her missing. He continued to celebrate 4th of July with his family at the farm. According to him, he was not initially worried about her absence, since she often went out with friends and stayed out late, sometimes not coming home until the next morning. Crystal's family, however, was immediately concerned. They began to worry after multiple attempts to contact her that day without her answering her phone. Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, reported her missing 2 days later on July 5th. She told the newspaper afterwards, "I told Brooks I'm going to the police department to report her missing, and he said that is what you should do." Also on July 5th, Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard, found her maroon 2007 Chevrolet Impala. It was parked with a flat tire by mile marker 14 of the Bluegrass Parkway. The keys were still in the ignition, and her purse and cell phone were also found inside. The driver's seat was not in its usual position. Crystal's family immediately knew that she had not been the last person to drive the car. Unfortunately, the discovery of Crystal's vehicle did not offer any clues as to her whereabouts. Her family subsequently announced a $25,000 reward for information leading to her disappearance. Sherry Ballard said through tear-filled eyes, "And we are trying to find her, and we just want her to come home." The community also stepped up in a big way, with family and strangers from all over setting out to search every inch of Nelson County and the surrounding area. Family member Sammy Johnson said, "The Ballard family was very vocal about their suspicion of Brooks Hawk having some sort of involvement in Crystal's disappearance." In an interview, Crystal's sister said, "Brooks Hawk has not offered once to search or help or do anything for the family." He admitted in an interview that he and Crystal had a stressed relationship at times, but he emphatically denied having anything to do with her disappearance. He said, "I am 100% completely innocent in this." Despite Crystal's family's criticisms, he claimed he was helping search efforts behind the scenes. 3 days after Crystal's car was found on July 8th, Brooks was brought in by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office for questioning. Brooks said that he and Crystal had a date night the evening she was last seen. According to him, they fed the cows, took a walk around midnight, and then he went to bed when they got home and she was playing games on her phone. The timeline and other details of Brooks' story did not add up. It was heavily raining that night, so it did not make much sense that they were out walking in a field at the time, especially with their 2-year-old son. Nelson County Detective John Snow led the questioning and noticed the gaps in his story. But Brooks remained adamant that he had nothing to do with Crystal's disappearance. In the recording of the interview, Detective John Snow was questioning Brooks about a late-night phone call with a specific number on the night that Crystal had vanished. The call took place when Brooks, Crystal, and the children were in their truck heading home. The detective asked Brooks who it was that was calling him. Brooks reluctantly told him that the number belonged to Steve Lawson. Detective Snow asked who Steve Lawson is, and Brooks replied that it was somebody that worked for him. Brooks told the detective that he could not remember why Steve called him so late. Detective Snow then instructed Brooks to call Steve from inside the interrogation room. He said that Brooks told him to speak to Katie, who handled the properties, and that she would get back to him. Brooks interjected and corrected him by saying it was Crystal. After the phone call, Detective Snow asked Brooks why he told Steve Lawson that she would call him back when she apparently had been beside him in his truck at that moment. Brooks made an excuse that he did not want to bother Crystal that late with work stuff. Nick Houck, Brooks' brother and a Bardstown police officer, called Brooks on his cell phone when he knew Brooks was being interviewed by detectives and told him not to speak with police. The next day, Nick was called by city officials to testify in front of a grand jury, which led police to suspect he also had involvement in the disappearance of Crystal. It is at this time that Nick stopped cooperating with the sheriff's office. However, he agreed to a polygraph test after being interviewed by Kentucky State Police. Nick finally took a polygraph test on July 20th after being contacted by the FBI. The examiner expressed grave concerns about the results of the polygraph test with Bardstown Police Chief McCubbin. When confronted with the results, Nick denied that he was lying, saying, "You are calling me a liar, and I don't like it when people call me a liar." Also in August 2015, Tommy and Sherry Ballard, Crystal's parents, started on the path of trying to get custody of Eli, the 2-year-old son Crystal had with Brooks Houck. That day in court was also the first time the Ballards saw Brooks Houck since Crystal was reported missing. Tommy Ballard said after the court hearing, "He made eye contact with me. I made eye contact with him. I just want to see my grandson. I'm not worried about nobody but my grandson and my daughter." The decision was made at the time that Eli will stay with Brooks. In October, 3 months after Crystal disappeared, it was declared that she was not alive anymore by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. On October 16, 2015, Nick Houck was fired from the Bardstown Police Department for interfering with the investigation of Crystal's disappearance. He was accused of warning his brother that detectives planned to interview him and advising him not to speak with them. Nick later told the Kentucky State Police that he only contacted his brother to tell him that they might be trying to trip him up, and he should protect himself. Kentucky State Police officially named Brooks Houck a suspect in Crystal's disappearance in October 2015. A police officer said, "I have 8 pages of circumstances that led me to look in Brooks Houck's direction." Houck continued to deny his connection to the disappearance, saying, "My whole family's name is trashed for something completely not even tied to me. It is taking a lot of energy and effort. I cannot even go on the side of the road without looking like I am guilty. This is starting to get silly. I don't need an attorney. I am innocent. This to me is starting to get silly." Police subsequently released footage from the Houck brothers' separate police interviews. In December 2015, a local newspaper reported the arrest of Danny Singleton on 38 counts of false swearing, after he allegedly lied under oath to a grand jury in relation to the investigation of Crystal's disappearance. Singleton is a close friend and longtime employee of Brooks Houck. Singleton later pleaded guilty and was released from jail after being in custody for 6 months. A white Buick became an important piece of evidence when a private investigator found that one was Crystal disappeared. The Houck brothers' grandmother, Anna Whitesides, owned a white Buick, but sold it several weeks after Crystal went missing. In June 2016, authorities issued a subpoena for the 82-year-old to testify in front of a grand jury. The subpoena stated the car may have been used to dispose of a body, cleaned, and sold in an attempt to prevent evidence from being discovered. Hannah Whitesides invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify in front of a grand jury for fear that she might incriminate herself. Whiteside's lawyer said, "There are lots of things, particularly in a high-profile case, where there is as frantic an investigation as there is here, that could ensnare an 82-year-old woman." According to attorney Jason Floyd, Anna Whiteside's statement to the police and the car buyer's information was enough. A judge later ruled to keep all future proceedings involving Whiteside's confidential. Hawk's grandmother had never been charged or arrested in connection with Crystal's disappearance, despite multiple search efforts over the year Crystal remained missing. Then, in August 2016, a more intensive search of the Hawk family farm was performed. Police searched 300 acres with at least 14 cadaver dogs. Detective John Snow said a crime involving Crystal is believed to have happened at the Hawk farm. Hawk's grandmother Anna Whiteside's home was searched, as were the homes of Nick Hawk, his brother and his mother Rosemary Hawk, where several pieces of farm equipment were seized as potential evidence. The search was done in order to find DNA, a body, or other potentially useful evidence. John Snow said afterwards, "I'm hopeful. I think we are moving in the right direction. It's been a long road and it may be even longer, but I think we're getting close." In July 2017, Brooks Hawk's new girlfriend, Crystal Maupin, was arrested after she was caught on camera ripping up signs connected to Crystal Rogers' case. Since Crystal's disappearance, signs in support of the family had been scattered all around Bardstown. Crystal Maupin stole some of those signs and was court-ordered to write an apology to Sherry Ballard. Sherry commented she could have just said, I'm sorry for my actions," but instead it is like she was trying to defend herself. Crystal's dad, Tommy Ballard, searched every day for his daughter and even started his own investigation. 16 months after her disappearance, on the morning of November 19, 2017, her dedicated father was preparing to go on a hunting trip on the family property on Ed Brent Lake. His 12-year-old grandson, Crystal's eldest son, an unknown assailant approached Tommy Ballard and shot him in the chest. He did not survive. Tommy Ballard was 54 years old. The Nelson County Coroner's Office said Crystal's father was shot once in the chest with the bullet entering his chest and exiting his back. Crystal's mother Sherry believed he was targeted because he was close to a breakthrough in their daughter's case. She told a newspaper that her husband lost his life because he looked for their missing daughter. She said her husband was always brainstorming new locations to search for Crystal and was the biggest champion in the fight to find her. Sherry Ballard believes he was targeted and even said he thought he was being followed in the days leading up to him being shot. The police searched Anna Whiteside's home again after the fatal shooting incident, but Commissioner Rick Sanders hired 2 retired troopers to investigate a handful of unsolved and high-profile cases in Bardstown, including that of Crystal and her father, Tommy Ballard. In the meantime, Crystal's mother still tried to get custody over Eli, Crystal's youngest son, as Brooks was the primary guardian. Nelson Circuit Judge Stephen Hayden argued that there is clear and convincing evidence significant hostility exists between the Ballard family and Brooks, such that it poses a significant risk of emotional harm to the child. Sherry Ballard and her late husband filed a petition for grandparent visitation just weeks after Crystal went missing. Sherry told a local newspaper that the courts have asked me. I still have no visitation for my grandson. That is my daughter's son, and I refuse to acknowledge that he is not my daughter's son. I feel like they want me to just erase him from my daughter's life, and I am not doing that anymore. I refuse to do that. After several trial court custody hearings, a judge initially granted Sherry visitation times with her grandson on alternating weekends. But a 3-judge panel overruled that decision in November 2018, agreeing that contention between Brooks and Sherry had boiled over to a point that it is not in the boy's best interest to spend time with his grandmother. Several hearings have followed that ruling. A new sheriff, Ramon Pinaroa, was elected in Nelson County in November 2018 after former Sheriff Ed Mattingly stepped down. The sheriff's office had been the lead investigating agency in Crystal's disappearance. Ramon Pinaroa had stated his commitment to solving Crystal's case. In an interview, he said the agency had a good idea of what happened to Crystal, and his mission is to find enough facts and evidence to make an arrest. As the years had come and gone, there was a yearning for justice. Crystal's family never gave up the search for her. and never stopped fighting for justice as her story continued to be shared on true crime podcasts and TV series. The Mother of Five's case has spawned documentaries and podcasts and plenty of news coverage. The Disappearance of Crystal Rogers is a crime series. The latest docu-series is part of the first episode of Season 3 of the popular real-life Burventown mystery, produced by the HLN Investigations team, takes a deep dive into the disappearance of Crystal. Numerous podcasts have also focused on the Crystal Rogers case. Ever since her disappearance, Crystal's family had plastered signs around Bardstown and the neighboring communities asking for any information. The mystery of what happened to the 35-year-old had puzzled law enforcement, tortured her loved ones, and haunted the small town of Bardstown for many years. In July 2019, the lead detective in Crystal's case, John Snow, retired. In one of his last interviews, he was asked if Crystal's body would ever be found. He replied, Nelson County Sheriff Chief Deputy Jody Gilliland was then named the new lead detective the following month. In 2019, Crystal's family held a vigil and said not a day goes by without thinking about her. Her mother said, "People say it gets better, but it does not. Every day is hard." The prayer vigil was held in remembrance of Crystal. But the family said it is also to keep her story alive in the hope of getting answers about her whereabouts. Her favorite color, pink, was everywhere. Pink t-shirts, pink ribbons, and a pink balloon release to close out the event. Sherry Ballard said it felt good to see the community continue to come out and support her daughter after all these years. She added, Sherry Ballard said even before Crystal disappeared, her whole family was close. It has been hard on the kids, but I do not want them to lose hope. God performs miracles, so there is always hope. As for leads in the case, Sherry said she is confident in the police that they will find Crystal. According to court documents, another hearing in the custody case of Crystal's youngest child was held on September 10, 2020, where new testimony was heard. In October 2020, Judge Hayden denied temporary visitation rights to Sherry Ballard. The court did not interview the child. Hayden ruled that the child has a strong relationship with Brooks, whom the judge described as a loving father. His mother and his new girlfriend, whose name is also Crystal Maupin. Judge Hayden wrote, the court believes the testimony by Sherry Ballard was sincere and that they would not do so on purpose, but is unconvinced they would be able to keep that vow given their demonstrated hostility toward Brooks. He continued, it would be fair to say there exists a significant rift between the parties that will likely never be healed. July 2020 marked 5 years since Crystal was last seen in Bardstown. Her disappearance had garnered national attention, but there was still no answers and no sign of her. For the first time, one of Crystal's 5 children, Kylie, sat down with a radio station and talked about what life had been like without her mom. Kylie said waking up every day and not being able to wake up and be like, hey mom, and what are you going to do today? Just like normal little things, the little things really matter more than the big huge things. It is those millions of little things she has missed out on for 5 years now. Now 19 years old, Kylie was just 14 at the time of her mom's disappearance. She still recalled, I was calling and texting and she was not answering. Nobody could get hold of her. She continued, it is especially hard during life's milestones, like graduation. When I graduated high school, seeing all the kids with their moms and they were like so proud. I knew my mom was proud, but like just wanting her to be there physically. It was very hard to see other moms there. Kylie said that after a day like that, and almost every day, she writes to her mom in a journal, telling her this, and then the very next page I'll be telling her, well, this is very serious. Like you should have been there. Like she's just right over my shoulder, talking back and reading what I'm writing. Over the years, the family raised money for information leading to an arrest in Crystal's and Tommy Ballard's cases. By the time Kylie was 19, the reward had grown to $100,000. Until justice is served, Crystal's family had one simple request. Everybody, keep praying and do not lose hope. You give us hope and you keep us going. Federal authorities announced in August 2020 that they were taking over the investigation in Crystal's disappearance, which led to a slew of searches at properties belonging to the Hawk family. During the summer of 2020, the FBI took over from Kentucky State Police and the Nelson County Sheriff's Office as the lead investigator in the case. with over 150 federal agents serving search warrants at 3 sites owned by Hawk and his family members. An FBI Louisville spokesman previously said, all 3 locations had already been searched to various degrees over the years. The search took place in the Woodlawn Springs subdivision where Brooks Hawk's construction company built several houses shortly after the disappearance of Crystal. Federal agents with the help from Nelson County Highway Department vehicles were continuing to zero in on a driveway and tuck away pieces of concrete and materials from outside a home. A photographer of a local newspaper saw investigators using a jackhammer on the driveway of a home. Throughout the search, police were allowing only a few cars into the subdivision and reporters were kept out. Commented on this search, I do not think they would just randomly pick a driveway unless they had a reason to do that. When my daughter went missing, how was building in that neighborhood? The FBI had not disclosed any details of their findings at this location, but on August 27, 2021, they did announce that an item of interest had been recovered from the concrete at one of the homes. During this most recent search, the FBI also stated that they know there are people in Bardstown who have information on this case and added that it was time for those people to come forward. One of the properties was the home of Brooks Hawk, and another belonged to his brother Nick. On September 7, 2021, the FBI announced that the search in Bardstown had ended, with several items of interest sent to a lab in Virginia for testing. Sherry told a local newspaper she had a lot of hope that her family will soon finally learn what happened to their daughter. She said, and I do have a lot of hope that this is where the investigation needs to be at and that they may be able to provide me answers this time. Regarding the thought of finally finding out what happened to her daughter, Sherry said, I want it, but it is going to be so hard for me. I just hope that I can handle that when they come to meet me with the news, even though I have waited for 6 years. I need closure. Our kids need closure. And to physically hear it, it's going to be so hard on us. The FBI has not released more details on the items of interest that were sent to the Virginia lab for testing. FBI spokeswoman Katie Anderson told a newspaper in October 2021, the agency had nothing new to share on the Crystal Rogers investigation. In 2021, the FBI said it was also offering up a $25,000 reward for information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the individual or individuals responsible for Crystal's disappearance. Crystal's case remained unsolved. One reason was that it was turned over several times between agencies. Sherry Ballard said in an interview in 2022, her daughter's children were then 22, 21, 19, 17, and 9. Crystal was a very good girl. She was a very good daughter. She was nice to everyone she met. She even let a friend stay with her because the friend didn't have a place to go. That is the type of person she was. We are a very close family, and I'm not doing anything different that any mother would do for their daughter at all. Crystal's mother added, I am just praying we will get some kind of closure. She still remembers in vivid detail the day she went to the police station to report Crystal missing. I remember them telling me it could be a year before we find any answers. And I was just shocked. I was just like, there's no way I'm waiting a year to find my daughter, Ballard said, holding back tears. In October 2022, the FBI launched another search at Brooks Farm, this time for 5 days. Afterwards, they said they won't comment on exactly what was collected. The land is owned by the mother of Brooks Howe. In January 2023, Attorney General Daniel Cameron appointed a special prosecutor to investigate Crystal's and her father's cases. On July 3, 2023, the 8th anniversary of her disappearance, the agency tweeted it made significant progress in bringing this case to its rightful conclusion. We continue to pursue every available lead until those responsible for Crystal's disappearance are held accountable. On September 7, 2023, the investigation took a sudden turn when it was announced that a suspect had been charged in connection to the case. His name is Joseph Lawson. He is 32 years old and had never been publicly named as a suspect or having any connection to Crystal's case. The arrest was the first major development in years. Joseph Lawson had not been charged with Crystal slaying, but instead faces a conspiracy charge. This means that the authorities believe he is connected to some level in the planning or commission of the acts that led to Crystal's presumed demise. Her body still had not been found. Lawson was also charged with tampering with physical evidence, which means investigators claimed Lawson might have destroyed, concealed, removed, altered, or fabricated physical evidence with the intent to impair the official proceeding. The charge of conspiracy was filed July 24, and the charge of tampering with evidence in June. But it wasn't arraigned since he was in the hospital after the indictments were returned. Lawson appeared on Zoom as he was arraigned in the Nelson Circuit Court. His indictment was read out and the court entered a plea of not guilty for him. His bond was set at $500,000 cash for the conspiracy charge, and $50,000 bond for the complicity to tampering with physical evidence charge. Though the indictment did not mention Crystal by name, it said that on July 3, 2015 and or July 4, 2015, the above-named defendant committed the offense of criminal conspiracy to end somebody's life, when, with the intention of promoting or facilitating the crime, he agreed to aid one or more persons in the planning or commission of the crime, or an attempt or solicitation to commit the crime, when he and or a co-conspirator intentionally took someone's life. Kevin Coleman, Lawson's lawyer, confirmed the charges were in connection with Crystal's case. He was not willing to comment any further. Lawson is due back in court on October 26, 2023 for a pretrial conference. This isn't Lawson's first brush with the law. He had a criminal past with charges including for the possession of methamphetamine, burglary, trespassing, and assault. Whether Steve Lawson, who phoned Brooks Hawk on the night Crystal disappeared, is related to Joseph Lawson, was not confirmed by investigators. A search of public records by a newspaper, however, stated that Steve Lawson in Bardstown, Kentucky is related to Joseph Lawson. They are both the same age. A local newspaper spoke with Crystal's grandfather, Till Ballard, who confirmed that the FBI contacted relatives to let them know about Lawson's arrest. Mr. Ballard Sr. said he believes the two slangs were related. He said he hopes the arrest in Crystal's case will lead to a break in his son's shooting. Tommy was not going to stop searching. Somebody had to stop him. I think Lawson knows something about Tommy, too. Lawson is in custody, but his exact location is being withheld as protected under federal law. Finally, on September 27, 2023, Brooks Hawk was arrested and charged with taking Crystal Rogers' life. His bond is set at $10 million cash. He is also ordered to not have any contact with Rogers' family. In a release, the FBI office said its officers have been laser-focused on our commitment to hold accountable those that were responsible for the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. Today, we take a significant step in making good on that promise. Hawk was arraigned on October 5, 2023. The next step in the case is to announce a trial date. It is also expected that a third person could be arrested. Sherry Ballard had this to say after the arrest was announced. To say today was overwhelming would be an understatement. She wrote, I have waited 8 long, gruesome years for this day. To see Brooks Hawk put in handcuffs was surreal for me. I have always known he was guilty. Now everyone will know that. I don't really even know the emotions I have felt today. I think probably everyone you could think of. I have to say thank you to the FBI. God sent me an angel when they came to my door. I personally know the work of a certain agent put into this case and the long, tiring hours he spent to make this day happen. Never once did he forget the fact that I was a mother and a wife going through the most tragic time that a mother and wife could go through. I cannot imagine the toll this took on him. This day would not have happened without him. Thank you to all the help he had within his office. His coworkers worked very hard. I want to thank them for looking out for me and my family. Thank you also to the Nelson County Sheriff's Office for assisting in making sure this day happened. Thank you to the prosecuting attorney and his office. A person turned an ordinary diner into a sanctuary of warmth and friendship. But then the bonds forged in such a place were suddenly ripped apart. A beloved community figure is tragically taken away. For nearly 24 years, this tragic demise remained a mystery. Stephen Davis was a 46-year-old man who stayed in Pensacola, Florida. He was a cab driver for Yellow Cab Taxi. His regular presence at the local Waffle House was as reliable as the sunrise, and his easygoing demeanor made him a natural at forming connections with patrons and staff alike. The Waffle House had become more than just a diner for Stephen. It was a home away from home, where he forged bonds that extended beyond the clinking of silverware and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. On August 26, 1998, an ominous cloud settled over the once inviting Waffle House as news spread of the tragic events that had befallen Stephen Davis. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, Stephen found himself embroiled in a terrifying encounter that would forever alter the course of his life. As he approached his cab, parked in the shadows of the early morning, he was unaware of the menace lurking within the vehicle. A man, concealed in the darkness, lay in wait for Stephen, setting the stage for a horrific ambush. Sensing imminent danger, desperately attempted to flee from the assailant. As he bolted from the car, the attacker opened fire, and a hail of bullets pierced the stillness of the Pensacola night. Despite his frantic efforts to escape, Stephen was struck multiple times, once in the jaw and twice in his right posterior thorax, and his life hung in the balance. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Stephen staggered towards the nearby Winn-Dixie and refuge from his assailant. Tragically, he collapsed in the parking lot, his life ebbing away as the gravity of his injuries took their toll. The glow of the streetlights illuminated the gruesome scene as Stephen succumbed to his wounds. In the aftermath of the horrific attack, Stephen's car was discovered near Navy Boulevard. Its driver's door and rear passenger doors left ominously ajar. The shattered driver's side window bore testament to the violence that had unfolded, offering a chilling glimpse into the chaos that had transpired. An immediate investigation was launched, with law enforcement officials working tirelessly to uncover any leads that could shed light on the identity of the perpetrator. Yet, as the case progressed, it became increasingly clear that the lack of witnesses and physical evidence presented a formidable challenge. Despite countless efforts and the occasional tip, the passage of time seemed only to deepen the enigma of Stephen's case. The unwavering determination of investigators to bring justice to Stephen Davis and his loved ones culminated in a significant breakthrough nearly a quarter of a century after his tragic demise. In 2022, the investigation into Stephen's case was reopened, and through the utilization of a bloody fingerprint from the scene was meticulously examined. This led investigators to identify Donald Holmes as the prime suspect. At the time of this discovery, Holmes was already serving a 20-year sentence in a Florida state prison for a home invasion robbery that occurred in Escambia County in 2012. Initially set for release in 2032, Holmes now faces new charges for the slaying of Stephen Davis. This will ensure that he will be held accountable for the heinous crime. The announcement made by the Escambia County Sheriff's Office on March 5, 2024, brought a long-awaited sense of closure to Stephen's family and friends. The relentless pursuit of justice, coupled with the remarkable advancements in forensic science, enabled detectives to finally connect the fingerprint to Holmes, ultimately solving the mystery that had haunted the community. For over 24 years, Stephen's sisters, Ruby Kastner and Julie MacArthur, said that he was known for being very friendly and helpful to anyone. Ruby said he was a big bear. He was there for everybody. He got a lot of people off illegal substances. As the legal proceedings against Donald Holmes ensue, the memory of Stephen Davis lives on. In a turn of events that has stunned both Los Angeles and Northern California, a cold case from 1984 has suddenly reignited public interest. Found beaten and lifeless in a Roseville alley, Madeline Garcia's case went cold for decades, leaving unanswered questions that have finally found answers decades later. Madeline Garcia, born in Chico, California to Spanish immigrant parents, lived a life rich in cultural heritage and community spirit. Growing up in Rockland and East Sacramento, California, she was cherished for her warmth and generosity. After marrying Frank Garcia, she made a home in East Sacramento, where she was known for her exceptional cooking, vibrant gardens, and creative crafts. In the late 1970s, Madeline moved to South Placer, continuing her commitment to her community. She lived a quiet life, but at the age of 69, that life would be tragically cut short. On the morning of September 26, 1984, Madeline Garcia was found in an alleyway on the 300 block of Atlantic Street. Madeline, known for her early morning walks on her distinctive tricycle, had been collecting cans when she was attacked. A witness discovered her body partially concealed behind the West House Hotel and Saloon. The scene was one of unspeakable violence. She had been beaten with the ferocity of the assault so intense that her dentures were thrown from the scene. The police who arrived on the scene were confronted with a grim discovery, as her body also bore signs of an assault. In the wake of Madeline's tragic demise, the Roseville Police Department launched an exhaustive investigation into her vicious slaying. Detectives canvassed the area, interviewing residents, and tracking down any potential leads. Detective James Fujitani and evidence technician Gary DeMille, one Dory, worked diligently at the crime scene, but progress was slow. The investigation was briefly redirected when a double slaying surfaced. And although Fujitani managed to secure convictions in those cases, Madeline's case remained unresolved. Years passed, and as the case grew colder, new detectives like Kurt Leatherman and Mary Green picked up the case. Leatherman, in particular, made significant strides by aligning the evidence with advancements in forensic technology and clearing numerous suspects. But even with these renewed efforts, Madeline's case remained unsolved, and the hope for resolution seemed increasingly distant. The breakthrough came decades later with advancements in DNA technology and investigative techniques. In 2024, investigators employed familial DNA testing. This technique revealed a match linking Richard Moore, a man with a history of arson near the crime scene, to the unsolved case. This new development prompted a renewed push to locate Moore, who had since relocated to Los Angeles. As the case was reactivated, the technology and persistence of investigators led to Moore's arrest on June 27, 2024. Moore was transported back to Placer County, where he faced charges involving the slaying of Madeline Garcia, as well as kidnapping and assault. Neighbors who lived by Moore in a quiet Echo Park neighborhood said they were in disbelief over the allegations, with many saying the man seemed friendly and helpful. One neighbor said, "It has been a shock to learn that something so crazy is happening with someone who we live near to. He was always pretty friendly. I rode my bicycle by one time and he asked if I needed to air my tires." Moore's initial court appearance on July 8, 2024, was the beginning of the judicial process. Moore, who entered a not guilty plea, was appointed a public defender as the case proceeded through the legal system. His arraignment set the stage for a trial that would test the strength of the evidence and the effectiveness of the new forensic methods used to crack the case. As the legal proceedings continues, Madeline's family and the Roseville community waits for a resolution. Terry Middlecopf, Madeline's oldest granddaughter, said Moore's arrest was bittersweet. She said, "It is a bittersweet moment. I can only hope to my grandkids remember me the way that I remember her." The arrest not only brought renewed attention to Madeline's case, but also provided a glimmer of closure after decades of uncertainty and grief. Dennis Leroy Wood, a 71-year-old man known for his gentle nature and love for solitude, lived peacefully in Moore Park, California. His days were spent in tranquility, a simple routine that provided comfort in his later years. But on April 16, 2004, Dennis' world was turned upside down in a way no one could have predicted. Dennis Leroy Wood's day that began as a seemingly ordinary day would soon spiral into a nightmarish event that no one could have predicted. But then deputies with the Ventura County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to his home on the 12500 block of Mountain Trail Street. The visit was part of a routine wellness check prompted by concerns from neighbors who had not seen or heard from Dennis in several days. The deputies approached the home, unaware that they were about to uncover a grim scene. As the deputies arrived at the property, there was an unsettling silence surrounding the house. The once cozy and peaceful home seemed eerily quiet, with no signs of life. After receiving no response to their knocks, the deputies decided to enter the residence. What they found inside was far more horrifying than they had anticipated. The lifeless body of Dennis lay in the home, who had always kept to himself, was found deceased from at least one gunshot wound. The discovery marked the beginning of a complex investigation. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office quickly ruled Dennis' demise as a slaying. Who could have committed such a heinous act against someone as harmless as Dennis? There were no immediate signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be stolen from the home, deepening the mystery surrounding Dennis' demise. Was this a random act of violence, or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation revealed disturbing details about the final moments of his life. It was determined that he had lost his life due to multiple gunshot wounds, with injuries to both his head and chest. Even more unsettling was the fact that Dennis' body had gone undiscovered for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, his home, once a haven of peace, had become the silent witness to a horrifying crime. Detectives interviewed neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have had contact with Dennis in the days leading up to the slaying. They pursued every lead, hoping to uncover something that would point them in the direction of the perpetrator. But despite their efforts, the case remained a mystery. The detectives quickly realized that the case was more complex than they initially thought. There were no clear signs of a break-in, and nothing of significant value appeared to be missing from the home. The absence of an obvious motive made it difficult for investigators to identify a suspect. With no clear direction, the case began to stall. Over the years, the case of Dennis remained a haunting, unsolved mystery for the Ventura County Sheriff's Office. Investigators would occasionally reevaluate the case, hoping that advancements in forensic might shed new light on the crime. Despite their efforts, the case remained cold, with no significant breakthroughs. However, that all changed on May 14, 2024, when the sheriff's office made a stunning announcement. They had uncovered new evidence that allegedly linked a man named Nami to the slaying of Dennis. After 20 years of uncertainty, there was finally a glimmer of hope that justice would be served. Authorities were tight-lipped about the specifics of the new evidence, citing the ongoing investigation and legal proceedings. The details of how Nami was connected to the crime and the nature of the evidence remained undisclosed. This left many to speculate about what had led to this unexpected breakthrough. One thing was clear: the case had taken a significant turn. On the morning of May 14, 2024, Nami was arrested around 11 a.m. by Ventura County deputies. Nami was quickly transferred to the Ventura County Jail, where he now awaits charges for first-degree slaying. With bail set at $2 million, Nami remained in custody as the legal process began to unfold. The arrest of Nami brought a measure of closure to the 20-year-old cold case. For the family and friends of Dennis Leroy Wood, the news was bittersweet. A mix of relief that someone had finally been held accountable, and sorrow for the years of pain and uncertainty they had endured. In July 1977, the remains of an unidentified individual were discovered in Yakima, Washington. An employee from a hardware store contacted police after noticing a distinct odor coming from a parked van in a parking lot near the hardware store. Officers with the Yakima Police Department responded to the scene, where they found the remains of an individual hidden inside of an abandoned vehicle. 2 days later, an autopsy was performed. The autopsy determined that the remains were that of a young female. She was approximately 18 to 25 years old. She was around 5 feet 8 inches tall and estimated to be 130 pounds. The autopsy concluded that she had sustained several injuries. The woman's cause of demise was determined to be strangulation, and her manner of demise was slaying. She had been hit on the head 3 times with a heavy object, mutilated and left face down on her hands and knees in the back of the van. She wore only light-colored socks. A green sweater had been placed over the upper part of her body. Other clothing that was found near the woman's body included a yellow handmade dress, white underwear stenciled with Scott Lily IIH, blue corduroy Farah, brand jeans, and a blue shirt. Attempts to identify the woman through dental and FBI fingerprint records were unsuccessful. Dental records were created from the remains and compared to several missing women from jurisdictions around the country. Unfortunately, there were no matches. Numerous individuals were interviewed. Several tips regarding the woman's identity were received from all over the country. However, no leads materialized into an identification for the woman or her perpetrator. The woman, who became known as Yakima Jane Doe, was buried in a Washington cemetery. In 2004, with advancements in forensic science, further attempts to identify the woman were made. At the request of the Yakima Police Department, the Yakima County Coroner's Office exhumed the remains of the unidentified woman. The remains were provided to the King County Medical Examiner's Office for further forensic evaluation. The remains were then submitted to the University of North Texas for the development of an STR profile. The STR profile was uploaded into CODIS in 2005. No matches were found. The identity of Yakima Jane Doe remained a mystery, despite the extensive efforts of law enforcement. In April 2016, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. In 2022, the Yakima Police Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram. They were hoping that advanced DNA testing could assist in the identification of Yakima Jane Doe. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the slain woman. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct extensive genetic genealogy research. This provided new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using these new leads. Investigators identified potential relatives of the woman after many interviews and conversations. A reference DNA sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the woman. This comparison confirmed the identity of Yakima Jane Doe as Verita Joni Gates, born on October 21, 1952. If alive today, Joni would be 71 years old. Joni was described by her family as a wanderer. She was known to hitchhike between Vermont and New York, where she was from, as well as to the West Coast. In early July 1977, less than 2 weeks before her remains were discovered in Yakima, Joni was known to be in a hospital near Chicago. Joni's family spent decades searching for her, not knowing until now what happened to her. Immediate family surviving Joni are her sister, Mary Lee, and her 2 brothers, Jeffrey and David. The identification of their sister has brought closure to their family after a 45-year search for her and for a wound that never healed. Her siblings wish to thank everybody involved for all their hard work in identifying Joni. Joseph Cannizzaro, a well-known entrepreneur in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, seemed to have it all: a successful career, thriving businesses, and a loving family. But on January 18, 2013, his promising future was shattered when 2 armed men invaded his home, leading to a crime that would send shockwaves through Lansdale. For years, the mystery surrounding his case lingered until a breakthrough brought long-awaited answers. This is a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of justice for a life taken too soon. Joseph Cannizzaro's roots were deeply embedded in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, where he spent much of his early life. From a young age, he was known for his industrious nature, working tirelessly to carve out a successful career within his community. Joseph's drive and determination made him a familiar face in Lansdale, especially as he became involved in various local businesses. His entrepreneurial spirit shone through when he co-owned Finn McCool's Tavern in Ambler, Pennsylvania, a lively establishment that quickly became a community staple. This venture was just the beginning of Joseph's expanding business interests, as he soon ventured into contracting, establishing multiple companies that solidified his reputation as a savvy businessman. With success came growth, and Joseph was not one to shy away from new opportunities. He began acquiring properties, taking on mortgages to broaden his portfolio and secure his financial future. One of these acquisitions was a Lansdale auto garage, adding yet another asset to his growing collection. His ventures made him a well-known figure, recognized not only for his business acumen, but also for his dedication to the local community. Despite his many responsibilities, Joseph managed to create a life of relative comfort. He balanced his numerous ventures with the demands of property ownership and business management. However, beneath the surface, the pressures of his expanding empire began to mount. As Joseph's career flourished, so did the demands on his time and energy. The weight of managing multiple businesses and properties brought increased stress. Yet Joseph remained a resilient and determined individual. However, Joseph's life took a sudden and tragic turn on January 18, 2013. That morning, just after 10 a.m., The police received a chilling 911 call from a residence on the 300 block of Swartley Road in Hilltown Township. The call, though brief, sent alarm bells ringing for the dispatchers. Despite their efforts, the connection was lost before they could gather more information, leaving an uneasy silence on the other end. Within minutes, another call came in, this time from a nearby house. A woman, her voice filled with terror, explained that she was calling from her neighbor's home. She relayed a horrifying story to the dispatchers. 2 armed men had broken into her home, taken her family hostage, and abducted her fiancé, who was later identified as Joseph Cannizzaro. She also reported that the intruders had stolen his pickup truck and other valuables from the property. The urgency of the situation spurred police into immediate action. They raced to the scene, fearing the worst, but hoping to prevent further violence. Upon arrival, officers began to search the premises for any sign of Joseph or the assailants. Their search led them to the garage, where they made a grim discovery. There they found Joseph's lifeless body, his hands cruelly bound with zip ties. The scene was one of unimaginable violence. The marks of a brutal struggle were evident. The officers knew that this was no ordinary robbery. It was a calculated and cold-blooded act of slaying. As investigators combed through the evidence, the details of Joseph's final moments began to emerge. An autopsy later confirmed the fears of the officers on the scene. Joseph had passed away, due to multiple stab wounds. His demise was officially ruled a slaying, but the investigation had only just begun. The search for the perpetrators and the motive behind such a heinous act became the focus of law enforcement, who worked tirelessly to piece together the events that led to this tragedy. The once vibrant and successful entrepreneur, who had built a life of hard work and dedication, had met a violent and untimely end. Detectives quickly interviewed Joseph Cannizzaro's fiancée, who recounted the terrifying events of that morning. She explained how 2 gunmen broke into their home and confronted her and Joseph in their bedroom, tying their hands and legs with zip ties. After Joseph's 12-year-old son entered the bedroom, one of the men put a knife to his throat and bound him with zip ties as well. His eldest son was at school while this happened. One intruder led Joseph through the house, while the other stayed with her and Joseph's young son. The situation turned even more horrifying when the second gunman took her into another room and assaulted her. The men stole jewelry, guns, and money. After the men left, she managed to free herself and the boy, escaping to a neighbor's house to call 911. As the investigation unfolded, crucial evidence emerged. In the years before his slaying, Joseph had incurred millions in debt, including money owed to various casinos. He claimed bankruptcy on $10 million in debt and later settled 2 federal lawsuits involving passing bad checks. Surveillance footage from that day showed the suspects unloading items from Joseph's stolen pickup truck behind a Friendly's restaurant in Quakertown. Later, officers found the abandoned truck with a pair of gardening gloves nearby, which were sent to the FBI for analysis. The gloves revealed DNA from an unknown male matching the DNA profile obtained from the assault examination of Joseph's fiancée. Investigators also discovered 11 cell phones in the victim's home, of which 8 were usable. The detectives also found a black face mask in the stolen truck. A DNA analysis in 2020 linked the mask to Thomas Delgado, whose phone records showed multiple contacts with Joseph in 2011. This was 2 years before the home invasion. However, Joseph's fiancée stated she did not know Delgado, nor did anyone in their home own a mask like the one found. Delgado was arrested and charged with nearly 3 dozen offenses, including slaying, assault, and kidnapping. With bail denied, Delgado remains in custody as investigators continue to piece together the full story behind this tragic crime. The arrest of Thomas Delgado brought a significant breakthrough in the case of Joseph Cannizzaro, offering a glimmer of justice for a community and family deeply affected by his tragic demise. While the scars of that brutal day will remain, the pursuit of justice continues as Delgado faces numerous charges. While Delgado is in custody, police continues to search for the second suspect. If you have any information on the case of Joseph Cannizzaro, please call Bucks County detectives at 215-348-6354 or Hilltown Township Police at 215-453-6011.